Is doing well. I know that I'm having a enjoyable fall day. That's right, it is fall time, which means that the weather is cooler, and that is a great thing. While I am definitely a North Carolina native, I do enjoy those cool fall days, just like I enjoy those milder spring days as well. So definitely was out and about, actually going to one of my part-time jobs yesterday, and noticed that by the evening time, it was downright nippy on the outside. So it's feeling a little bit on the chilly side, and I was actually enjoying a little bit of that change from the heat and humidity. And it definitely looks like summer is gone. Of course, with the whole fall weather, you get some of that fall rains. And of course, we do know that Hurricane Ian came through. Didn't do as much damage in North Carolina as it did in Florida, but it did knock some people out of their power, and it definitely did some damage. And of course, it is hurricane season. So, of course, we have to pay attention to that. I think that goes until November. So, a lot of folks will still be paying attention to those development storms and seeing what is happening in that regards. And of course, we do know that it is also political season, because coming up in November will be the elections, and definitely there'll be the midterm elections. So folks will be hopefully paying attention to their candidates, not just the national ones, but also the local ones as well, because oftentimes it is the local candidates that have a more direct impact on your everyday life. So definitely, hopefully, folks are paying attention to everything from folks in the sanitation departments to folks in soil and water to definitely the mayors and city councils. And maybe you live in an area that does not have a city council or things in that space. So maybe you've got a county commissioner. And actually, I know Durham has both county commissioners and a city council. So definitely, I hope that folks are paying attention to that. And of course, fall also means that it's sports time. And I was actually getting worried about my fantasy football team, because we started off 0-2, but then we've managed to win 2 games in a row. So we're 2-2, and that isn't bad for my start. I don't know that I'll be winning any championships with that record, but I can still hope and hopefully get on this continued winning streak and maybe bring the title home this time around. But we're going to see if that happens or it doesn't happen. And as many of you know that watch this show, I'm a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan. So I was actually up early on Saturday watching, actually Sunday, I should say, watching that particular game. And yes, I was definitely a little bit on the anxious side, because their kicker, meaning the kicker from New Orleans, kicked that long 60-yard field goal. And then I was sitting there going like, is he going to kick another one? And it definitely looked like it had enough leg to go through. But fortunately for my side of the ball, it bounced off of the cross right. So I was definitely glad to see that happen. Otherwise, I would have gone from that sense of jubilation that we won a game. And I think that we are tied with Green Bay for first place and all of that, to that sense of dread that we were heading into overtime. And speaking of sports, the Durham Bulls, which is where I am at and all of that, they won for the second year in a row the international title. So they went to Las Vegas and won that title, and all in that space. So I was glad to see that happen, and they won for the second time. And some of my friends might be like, why is Mark a Minnesota Vikings fan? He's never lived a day in his life in Minnesota. Well, I have been one of those not fair weather fans, but a lifelong fan, because I fell in love with that way back in the Fran Tarkenton era. Yes, I just dated myself and all in that space. So yes, I was a fan even during that time when a lot of things were going on in that space. And I was going like, I like this team. I even like their nickname, the Purple People Eaters, for the defense and all in that space. So that's just some of the things that I was thinking about on my mind on this particular day. But I've got an amazing guest that I'm looking forward to bringing in. And I've actually got to tease her about something, because I am also involved in the festival space, having done a number of festivals here in the Durham area and in the whole less the rest of the triangle, but I have done some in the Carborough, and I think I might have even done one or two in the Raleigh area. And of course, we all know that if you do an event, you give those lovely lanyards, because that usually means that you're going to get access to this or that. So I've had lanyards myself for things ranging from music festivals to film festivals to a number of other things. So when I first saw Jaci come on, I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff in the background. And she told me that that was a collection of her lanyards. So I can definitely relate to that notion of lanyards. And a lot of times people don't think about it, but lanyards are part of the branding of festivals. So there are people that actually literally collect those lanyards, because sometimes that lets them know that they were at those festivals and the role that they played in the festivals, and even sometimes the access that they had in the festivals as well. So, like I said, I definitely noticed that in your backdrop. So, definitely that is something that I don't know that people always think about them as part of the branding strategy of festivals, but we do know that just like the t-shirts, and I had a greater collection of t-shirts until moving from place to place. So some of those t-shirts unfortunately got lost in the shuffle and all of that, but I still have a decent amount from blues festivals, the festival at the Eno, and a number of other festivals that I have been part of. So t-shirts are another part of branding that I think people don't necessarily always think about, even though a lot of folks like to rush to get their collection of t-shirts, even if they go to a football game or a baseball game, as I mentioned earlier, and all in that space. So definitely glad that you were able to join me, Jackie. And I know that branding is part of your whole marketing. And I did see, and I was worried about it when I mentioned that in one of your case studies was some things were the New Orleans Saints. And I was going like, oh, wait a minute, that's the team that we played, meaning the Minnesota Vikings, and all in that space. So definitely glad to have you here. And if you could just share a little bit about how you got into branding, because everybody is thinking, I need my right brand. And sometimes they don't even know what the right brand is.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate you having me on the show. Yeah, so for me, branding came out of my work when I was in Los Angeles doing marketing and advertising and brand building for a number of different companies. When I returned home to Louisiana, back to Lafayette, I worked for an ad agency, and then in 2001 started my own agency. And in that process, realizing that there's 74,000 ad agencies in America, we
Mhm.
needed to have our own niche. And so our expertise and our background and our success had come from branding. And so that's where we have hung our hat for the past almost 22 years. You know, for us, we define branding as the emotional connection that people have with a product, service, or company. As you were talking in the intro, sports teams,
Right.
fanatics, fans have a certain affinity towards a certain team and hatred for another team because of the branding. And
Right.
so when we think about the brand identity or the logo, that represents the feeling that we have, but it's that feeling that we have to work to develop. It's the feeling that caused people to choose you over the competition, and it's the feeling that allows people to continue to be successful in their business.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I know sometimes even when you look at the brands, there are certain brands that are easy to identify based on their symbol and what they have become identified with. I think that everybody, when they think of Kellogg's, thinks of Tony the Tiger, definitely as a person that loves both cats and dogs. I know that a lot of people would associate a certain kind of commercial with Morris the cat and things along that line, and definitely as one that used to own this particular pet, meaning that I had actually a collection and they were handed to me as a gift when a friend was moving to New York and transplanting their life into that area. They gave me three geckos. And of course, a lot of times people would think of gecko as being associated with that particular company that they are associated with, namely Geico, and all in that space. But I was just wondering, do you think that most companies recognize that brand identity? Because I'm also sometimes shocked when I see people that have a brand identity and nobody really is quite sure what their symbol behind the identity is. Like I said, I just named three that are very obvious and are very much associated with their brands. But there are other times that you're sitting there going like, I don't know what that's supposed to be and everything. Like as I was just thinking about it, I was going like, I'm really not 100% sure. And I know that you're in Lafayette, but I know that there's like those symbols that are on the New Orleans helmet. But as one that is a non-Louisianan, I have no idea what that means and how it ties in to the Saints and all of that. And maybe I'm missing something, but I was just wondering as to the brand and do we always understand the brand identity? Because, like I said, when I look at that symbol, I like the New Orleans team when they're not playing Minnesota, and I'm going like, I don't know what that actually means on their helmet, but I'm sure it has a meaning.
Well, the fleur de lis, which is the symbol that you're referring to, is not only utilized by the New Orleans Saints, it's also utilized by the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, which is
Oh,
my alma mater. And so the fleur de lis has its origins in Europe. specifically in Italy and France. And as you know, most of the people who immigrated to the United States came from Europe. And when we look at the early French settlers in Acadiana, which is the section of Louisiana where I live, the fleur de lis is representative of that area. So those brand identities, those icons, those logos, those marks, those bugs, whatever you want to call them, those are not necessarily have to be recognized, identified, known, or loved by everyone.
Right.
It's only about the target audience. And so when we think about the symbols that represent brands, those symbols need to be visual identifiers like beacons, like lighthouses to the target audience that they're trying to reach.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that here in Durham, and I alluded to them earlier in their championship win and everything, a lot of times when people think of the Durham Bulls, the first thing that comes to their mind, other than the movie Bull Durham, is our mascot. And sometimes I think the mascot also plays a lot into the branding as well, because we have Willie Bull, and Willie Bull will oftentimes appear at events. Just about 2 weeks ago, we had Centerfest, which is our large street festival, and Willie Bull definitely made an appearance there and definitely was welcomed by the kids and even adults that have kid-like personalities, in the sense of liking to have that joy that we love in our kids to have, even as they become adults and all in that line. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit even to the importance of mascots in brand identity as well. Because like I said, whether it is Willie Bull, or whether it is the Duke Blue Devil, or whether it is the Ram associated with the Tar Heels and a number of other things, definitely I think that mascots play a lot into the brand development as well.
Well, mascots really don't play into the brand development as much as they do the communication of the brand. So, brand
Okay.
development should be done as a foundational exercises. That's the work that we do to identify what your brand is. Every organization has a brand.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, people don't understand that because they don't realize that it's the emotional connection with people know who you are and it's positive, or they don't know that you even exist and you are silent to them. Either way, there's a brand there. So we look at the building of a brand as having four core components. It's a process that we call razor branding, and it's the central point of the book that Michael, who's my co-founder, and I wrote 2 years ago, called "He Said, She Said" branding.
Okay.
The four core elements. The first is focus. Who is the target audience? You don't need to connect with everyone. You just need to connect with your core target audience. So you need to know who they are, their demographics, their psychographics, their personality profile. The more you know about your target audience, the better you're going to be able to not just reach them or connect with them, the better you're going to be able to actually serve them. The second thing that people need to know when building a brand is when we talk about focus. And so that's the core audience, right? The second piece is promise. Why you? So,
Mhm.
not why you for everybody. You're not the right choice for everybody. You're the right choice for certain people. And so, why are they going to choose you instead of the competition? When they look at all the other options available to them to solve a problem, fill a need, a place to buy or do business with, there's got to be a reason why they're choosing you. Most businesses' biggest mistake is looking and sounding just like every other company in that space instead of being different. So
Right.
the promise is a place to differentiate. The third piece is connection. This is the messaging. What are you going to say to cut through the clutter and get your target audience's attention with enough reach and frequency that they actually see you? And then the fourth piece is what we call harmony, and that's where the message is going to go. So when you know who you're talking to, you know why they should listen to you, you know what you're going to say to them, and you know where you're going to say it. That's the fundamentals of building a brand.
No, and as you said that, one of the things that and we've actually brought this up on this show and on this network before, is there are certain groups that I am very much fans of some of what they are about, meaning that I am fans and I understand where they are coming from, but I sometimes think that they miss the notion of branding and have misbranded themselves and everything in that space. And I'll give an example, and I think that it happens more on the political side, because I think that sometimes branding experts need to be hired by some of these politicians and even some of these social justice groups and all along those lines. Because one of the things that I've talked about on this network, and definitely just in general conversations is that I don't think necessarily that most, I'm not saying all, but that most of the people that are involved in, say, like defund the police, actually want to totally get rid of the police force and all of that. But I think that that is a case of bad branding, where they have used the term, and people that are on one side or the other of the political aisle have run with it and have made it less than what the actual message is. Because I think most that might different have a difference with me on that, but that is kind of my understanding in talking to a lot of people that back that idea. So one of the things I think happens in politics and in social justice is that there's a lot of sloganism, and sloganism can help with the branding, but it can also hurt in the branding as well, because there's so much sloganism that you can run with the slogan one way or the other and make it lose its meaning. Because like I said, I used to participate in protests here in Durham and in other places. And one of the great slogans that they would use all the time is "Who streets my streets," even though they know totally well that the streets aren't really theirs and everything. But it sounds good, it sounds catchy, but it's definitely also not something that is all that effective, except for as a catchy slogan that you can march and yell with and all of that. And there were even some of those kind of slogans within the civil rights movement as well. So I was just wondering, do you think that sometimes on the political front and just in general, folks misuse branding and they use it in a way that is misrepresentative?
Well, I think that we've gotten away from actually branding.
You're
When
right.
you look at anything that is organically grown out of the people, those are more passionate
Mhm.
and more messaging challenges.
Right.
I think that anytime you try to boil something down to a hashtag,
Right.
you're going to lose the overall sentiment, and that's going to be a challenge to any cause marketing.
Right.
When you look at organized nonprofits, organized efforts, true organizations that have been built up to fill a need in a community, typically they're going to follow those principles of branding, and they're going to be more successful because they're following the steps to do it right. I
Right.
think that any organization, whether they're for profit or not, that just kind of comes out of the passion of the people, and there's no ownership and there's no true plan, there's going to be some challenges to having success.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. At what point in your life did you realize that you wanted to get involved in branding? I know that there are some people that definitely knew at a very early age. Maybe they were selling Girl Scout cookies, or maybe they were setting up a lemonade stand. And I've definitely had friends in that space, so they knew that they were going to be involved in some form of branding. Because even though that is a sales job, you still have to brand the product as well. So they already knew that they were going to get into this kind of field. And there are others that it came into their life much later, and they came into this reality that this is something they wanted to do in their life at a later time. So at what point did Miss Russo decide, hey, I want to be a branding expert? And did you know this already when you were a kid? Did your parents go and like, this person is going to be really good at branding, really good at the whole notion of marketing and all of this? Or is this something that came to you later in life, maybe after your college years? And you mentioned that you went to college in Louisiana, or is it something that was ingrained in you at an early age?
No, as I mentioned, it came out of the formation of our agency. Being one of the 74,000 ad agencies in America, we didn't want to be full service, trying to be all things to all people. We really wanted to make sure that we had a specialty, a specific area of expertise. And for us, because of my background working in Los Angeles and Michael's background working in Seattle, we realized that the natural evolution of that was for branding.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have there been times that when you've been in the branding space, because the book is entitled "He Said, She Said," and I was wondering, in the branding field, are there times that you have sat there going like, "I need to brand it in a certain way that is geared more toward the lady population, and some that is geared more toward the gentleman population"? And if so, is that something that you wish more companies would do, or is it not needed to have happen in that sense? Because I do know that there have been times that branding has been seen to be in one way, but then it was certain groups may not necessarily like the identity that was associated with the brand and all in that space. Because one of the famous cases that comes to my mind is Jemima, which a lot of folks do not like that image in the African American community, and we even saw some of that happen with the Washington Redskins, which is why they're now the Washington Commanders, and all in that space. So I was just wondering, is target branding a good thing in your mind, and is it something that we need to have more of, or are there cases where target branding can be a negative impact?
Well, you're talking about two very different things. When you talk about marketing towards a specific gender, that's demographics. And so,
Mhm.
whether we are looking at someone by gender, by age, by income, by geography, that's a necessary element of being focused with your marketing towards building a brand. If the Durham Bulls wanted to sell season tickets, it would be very wasteful for them to try sell tickets to people in California. The
Mhm.
chances that those people are going to fly to Durham for every game are very slim. They would be much wiser to concentrate their marketing efforts in a geographical area immediately around where the team is based, or
Right.
when they're traveling where they're playing for an away game. So, gender plays a role, just like education, income, and geography. All of those demographic factors are a part of it. When you talk about the Washington Redskins and Aunt Jemima, that's not about brand building and targeting on demographic lines for marketing. Those are more about terms that are out of date and should no longer be utilized in advertising and business today.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you and everything. You keep talking about it, and I hear people talk about it all the time and all along those lines. And one of those terms, and I hear it thrown out there quite often, but I don't know that people understand what it means and how that term is and what it even entails. But could you talk a little bit about the importance of psychographics? Because you've used it, I've heard other people use it as well, and I think a
Sure.
lot of people hear that term, but it's kind of like one of those terms that you hear thrown out there, but aren't necessarily understanding the meaning of it or even how it plays into the branding conversation.
Sure. There's an easy way to think of it. Demographics are all surface things on the outside. Psychographics are all core things on the inside. And so when we think about demographics and we group women 25 to 54 together who are college educated and make $50,000 a year, that's a demographic profile. However,
Mhm.
when you think about all of the women that fit that demographic profile, that's a massively huge audience, and those women aren't necessarily actually connected in any way of substance. When you move into psychographics, that's where we can actually connect people by what's happening in their life, by their passions, by what they care about, by their challenges. And it gives you a chance to have a better understanding of who it is that you're trying to reach, and then, therefore, how to actually reach them, and not just reach them, but connect with them at a level that's going to cause them to change their habits. Right now, people have made their choices as to who they're going to buy from. And so if
Right.
you want them to stop buying from that company and start buying from your company, you have to give your target audience a good reason to make a change. The demographic grouping is just that, it's a surface level group. But the psychographics allow you to really dig in and connect with them at a level where you can get them to change their habits and start to buy from your company instead of the company they've been supporting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know another thing that you oftentimes talk about is this notion of having a message matrix and all in that space. And I don't know that all the time companies have that in their mind or even know how to do that. So if you could just share a little bit about what it is to make a message matrix. And do you think that a lot of companies do that effectively in general, or is this something that needs to be done more effectively by many corporations, including some of our national corporations and international ones?
Well, sure. So a message matrix is where you look at all of the different target audiences that you have, and you make sure that you're creating a message to match each one of them. If you think about selling a pair of Air Jordans, you're
Mhm.
going to have a lot of different target audiences to buy Air Jordans. You're going to have the actual adult who wants to wear the shoes for themselves because they're comfortable, they're stylish, they like how they fit. You're going to have the collector. You're going to have a kid who wants those shoes, and you're going to have that kid's parent who's actually making the purchase. Those are four broad audiences, but they at least give you kind of a sense of the different audiences. Now, would you have the same message for each one of those people? Absolutely not. The message to reach the kid who wants to wear the shoes themselves is going to be vastly different than the message to reach the parent who's going to buy the shoes for the kid. The message to the collector is going to be very different than the message to the adult who's wearing them for themselves. So, four very different audiences, four very different messages. So, to create a message matrix means you're going to start with in the left column your different target audiences. In your next column, the things you know about each one of those audiences to allow you to get to know them even better. You'll have the demographics, you'll have the psychographics. Your next column, what do they currently know about you? What do you want them to know? And then where should you put that message to be able to connect with them? Each of those columns in the matrix have an important role in you getting to know that target audience better and exactly what message you're going to create to connect with that target audience to cut through the clutter. Google tells us that on average, most people are seeing upwards of 8,000 ads every day. Every day. And so the human species has evolved to protect themselves. Just as over evolutionary times, we've continued to grow and evolve in other ways. This is another way that we've evolved to protect ourselves so we don't see those 8,000 ads that are being served up to us every day. How could we properly see and process that and still have space left in our brains for all the other functions we have to do? So, our body allows us to develop these filters to just ignore it. So we drive down the highway, we see the same billboards we see every day. We ignore them. We develop billboard blindness. We listen to the radio or a podcast. We ignore those ads. We check our email. We ignore that spam. We read Yahoo News. We ignore those digital ads. We scroll Facebook. We ignore those ads. It's the only way we can get through the day. And so to want to cut through that clutter and actually get someone's attention, you have to really be worth the filter to not block you out like it's blocking out the other 7,999 ads.
No, that makes a lot of sense. As you were just saying that, I was thinking that one of the things that we've been contemplating here with Pod TV and Nick Palveda and Kim Calhoun are the founders of this network, and they actually founded it out of well, it was founded before the pandemic, but the pandemic actually kind of helped it grow, and it's definitely grown into several shows. I think there's probably close to like somewhere in the range of maybe 50 or 60 shows that are aired during the course of the week. So it is very much like a regular network in the sense that we're even airing reruns, and hopefully as more and more move in toward 24/7 content. Now, some of this is a rebranded content, meaning that after it airs the one time, we're putting it back on again at a later time and all in that space. And one of the things that I've mentioned to them, and I don't know what your thoughts are as to whether this would be effective, because you just mentioned that a lot of times people will see ads and see brands, and it is on locations that are we block out. So definitely, if you are a driver, and I am a non-driver, I get around by mass transit and by the help of friends and along those lines. But if you are a driver, and even if you're a non-driver, you see those lovely billboard signs. And if you're like me, you're catching the bus, you see those signs on the bus and all of that. Now, some of them you may read and pay attention to. Quite often you ignore them even if they're on the bus, as opposed to meaning in the inside, as opposed to the outside and all of that. But I had mentioned to the network that maybe we should put some of our logos and ads on that kind of bus transportation. I don't know that they've bought my argument yet, but as a branding expert, do you think that those ads are effective, or are they not that effective, and that people have done what you just described, which is block them out, and maybe it won't help Pod TV grow? But I've seen a number of ads that I've looked at, and I'm going like, well, if the buses are constantly traveling and they're constantly going by people, and people are either walking by the bus or driving by the bus or getting on the bus, somebody might see the ad and somebody might want to actually see what we are all about. So that's why I was suggesting that they get involved in that space. But I just wondered, as a branding expert, what are your thoughts around bus ads and even ads on planes and those kind of things as to whether they are effective?
Well, I think that most people tend to go straight to the tactic and
Mhm.
say, is this a good tactic or is this a bad tactic?
Right.
And the answer is yes. Every tactic can be good and every tactic can be bad. So, whether it's a bus bench, a bus side, a
Mhm.
billboard, a radio, a TV, a direct mail, an email, a social media, a digital media, there are literally 3,000 different ways you can spend money on ads every day.
Mhm.
And so none of them are inherently successful or failures on their own. If you just go and spend money on a tactic, that is a great way to waste money.
Okay.
If you follow the principles of branding and look at who your target audience is, um, look at why they should choose to give you their time and attention, look at what message you're going to say to them, and then boil down the least number of tactics possible to reach that target audience as many times as possible, you're going to have your best chance of success. So, on its own, just to say, are bus ads good? Um, there's a lot of questions to be answered. Who's the target audience? What's the message going to be on those ads? How frequently are people going to see those ads? All of that factors into the evaluation of the decision. I was a media buyer for years before I started the agency. And so, as a certified media buyer, we have certain criteria that we have to evaluate every opportunity on. So, there's not enough information there for a proper evaluation.
No, that makes sense, and I definitely can appreciate your honesty in that answer and everything. One of the things that Nick jokingly says, and that is one of the two founders, and I don't think that he's only halfway joking when he uses it and everything. And sometimes I wonder if in the brand space, and there is such a thing as being overly optimistic or overly ambitious and all in that space. Because one of the things that Nick jokingly says, and he said it several times on the air, so I'm not speaking out of school by saying it, is that definitely as an international platform, meaning that this network is internationally known. It goes to different places. There are even shows that come from other countries. I know that we have a guest regularly on our news show that's out of Australia. There is a guest regularly out of Switzerland. Yeah, I think that's where Ben is located at, and everything. And there's even a show out of Malaysia, and there was a show out of Nigeria that hopefully will be coming back. And there were some shows out of South Africa and a number of other places. So one of the things that Nick jokingly calls this that he wants to do is have global media domination. And I'm using his terms, not mine, and all of that. And I'm going like, okay, that sounds good as a tactic, but maybe that's being overly ambitious as a brand. So I was just wondering your thoughts around the notion of something that is that broad in definition. Because if you're going to have global media domination, I guess that means you're going to take on CNN, ABC, and the rest of the folks that are in the global landscape. So as one, and like I said, he's in the pension attorney space, and his business partner is an engineer. It sounds catchy. It sounds wonderful. And of course, if you're talking to people like your friendly restaurant person, they can get an idea of what you mean. You mean that you want to get as much saturation as you can in the global market, but it also reigns and sounds a little bit like either Ren and Stimpy or one of those other cartoon characters that was always looking for domination of the world in one form or fashion or another. So I just wondered, is something like that a catchy enough phrase, or is that something that would be a little bit too cartoonish in your mind? And like I said, he does use this a couple of times. He's even jokingly used it on our news show. I think he even used it earlier today or on Monday.
Well, I think it goes back to your target audience. Is that phrase going to resonate with your target audience? I find that most taglines or campaign phrases that are me talking about me, it's
Mm-hmm.
not very interesting to anybody else. But a tagline or campaign concept that is the target audience focused, that's going to do a much better job of getting the attention of the target audiences. When you look at the most successful campaigns out there, the one thing they all have in common is that they really knew their target audience and they were speaking directly to that audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's definitely something that I know a lot of folks have been trying to figure out, because there is a target audience out there that has been changed a lot. And I actually am an admirer of them. I think that they have done some amazing things. My nephews do not quite fall in that category. Actually, I guess they do fall in that category based on when they were born and everything. But definitely these millennials and all along those lines, a lot of people are targeting them, and they're targeting them in unique ways because they are in a unique space, because a lot of them are having things that are new to society that are part of the media landscape. Like I know that my nephews recently got those Oculus sets, and a lot of people are very much into the metaverse and augmented reality, virtual reality, and things along those lines. So I was just wondering if you could talk, because I know it's one of the things that you are very much interested in, as ways that we can reach the millennials, and do we need to speak their language in order to reach them? So do we need to understand things like AR and VR and crypto and some of these other things that a lot of them are into, but there's a lot of those terminologies that they talk about are, foreign language to us. And I'm sure that back in the 80s and the late 70s when I was a teenager, some of the things that I was saying were probably foreign to my grandmother who was living at that particular time. So I don't think it's a new concept of different generations having different conversation points, but I was just wondering if you could speak to how we should reach millennials and how we should brand to millennials.
Well, I think that building the brand has the same core principles no matter what demographic group you're going after. So when you try to group all millennials together, you're going to lose. They're not all the same. And
Right.
so branding is back to understanding your target audience beyond just demographics, understanding their psychographics, understanding their personality profiles, understanding their pain points. And
Right.
so when we know those things about people and we don't just label them, but we actually know them. We know what they care about. We know what they want. We know what they need. And we know how we fill a need for them. That's when you're going to be able to earn their trust.
Right.
Um, and so it's anybody who starts with how do I sell to millennials, they're already behind.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree with you on that. And I'm glad that you just brought up something that I think is a branding mistake that a lot of people make. And one of our newer shows is called K Pasta, and it's actually a lot of Latin American women from different cultures and all in that space. So they're not all like Mexican, they're not all Puerto Rican, they're not all Venezuelan. They're all from different parts of the Latin American community, and they're speaking to issues that are important to them. One of the things that is a branding mistake that I think a lot of people must make, and it kind of comes back to what you just alluded to, is I think that sometimes when they target a market or do market branding or try to target one specific market, they target it as if all of those people are alike in that same subset. So I do know that within branding, there are also subsets. So like I said, there is a Hispanic market, and there are some brands that even target the Hispanic audience, the same as the African American audience. But not everybody in the African American community is the same, and definitely not everybody in the Hispanic community is the same. But you do sometimes find brands that seem like they are targeting it as if they think that all of those groups are like-minded, and we know that they are not oftentimes like-minded, and all of that. They might even have different musical tastes and different food tastes and different other kind of tastes in a variety of things. So is that a common brand mistake to
Mm-hmm.
target people that as if they are one of one group, if they are being brand marketed and doing that kind of marketing toward a specific area, but you're putting it as if it's a homogenous group, and oftentimes those groups are not as homogenous as they seem to be.
Correct. And that is exactly the problem is when we try to group people together by demographics,
Right.
by their heritage, for example, or
Right.
by their age group, we are sure to fail. That's not how we build brands. That is when we think we know more than the target audience, and we can just buy their attention to sell to them. It's a very quick way to waste a lot of money instead of getting to know the target audience and then earning their business.
Right. What are some of the worst branding mistakes that you have seen, or that you wish that people did and not do on a regular basis? I think we've alluded to some of them, but I'm thinking that I might have missed some. But what are some of the brand mistakes that even when you're sitting at home personally, not just in your office, but also when you're at home watching commercials or watching other forms of brand development that you're sitting there going like, I still can't believe that they're doing this in the 21st century. So what are some of the branding mistakes that you have seen that you have recognized as being outdated that you wish were not out there as much?
Well, I mean, the biggest things we've actually covered today. It's assuming that all demographic groups, or that everyone within a demographic group is the same instead of getting to know them. It's doing what I call chasing shiny things,
Mm-hmm.
where people will say, "Hey, I heard about this new thing called TikTok. Let's be on that."
Okay.
Does that make sense for you? Is that where your target audience is? Can you communicate your message clearly there? Hey, I want to be on the side of buses. Is that the right choice? Is that where you should spend your money? Going straight to the tactic is 100% going to fail every time. The third thing is about messaging. And so when people write these messages and it's all about themselves, instead of being about the target audience and how you solve problems for the target audience, then that's a big miss. So really there's four core elements to building a brand, right? The first is focus, who you're targeting. People miss target or don't target. The second is promise. Why you? They do not pay attention to the competition. They do not differentiate and stand out. Instead, they just blend in. Huge missed opportunity. The third is connection, the messaging, talking only about themselves, listing features about their company, doing everything but actually getting to the root of the matter and conveying a message that the target audience cares about. Big miss. And then fourth is harmony, where those messages go. If you start there instead of putting that as the fourth step, that's going to be another place for you to waste a lot of money.
Yeah, it sounds like it. As you were just saying that, I was just thinking to myself that there was a time and a place, even, and I don't know that it is still out there in the branding space. It seems to me that you're saying that in some ways it's a good thing, in some ways maybe it's not a good thing. But as a person now in just hit the big 60 on July 1st, so definitely have some history of watching ads and watching brands develop, including some newer brands and some older brands. I remember that in the older age, there was a lot of comfortability, and some of it has been eroded, but there's a lot of comfortability in kind of representing your brand as your individual person and everything. I mean, car salesmen still do that to some degree, but it just seems to me that it was more popular where somebody would come and, say that they are representing this company or representing this entity or whatever. And I kind of alluded to it as still being out there to some degree with Tony the Tiger, and there are others that are out there like the leprechaun from Lucky Charms, if I'm going to go use the cereal analogies and all along those lines. But I'm just wondering, as a brand strategy in the 21st century, is this something that you have seen continue, or has it stopped? And if it has stopped, why has it stopped? Because I just remember a lot of people, even some of the insurance agencies, including some national ones, that would have somebody that would be their spokesperson, for lack of a better term. And I don't know that I see as many spokespeople type ads and brands out there as there used to be in my mind. But as you said, there are so many brands. Maybe I am seeing the ones that are out there, or maybe they are being the ones that I am mentally blocking out of my head and everything. But are we seeing a lot of those personal brand spokesmen out there as well?
I think that we will always have spokespeople, mascots, representatives of a company or a product. That's never going to change. I think that you look at any modern new companies and their ad campaigns this year, you'll see just as many mascots as you will from 10, 20, 50 years ago. I also think you're seeing another level of representation with the influencer market.
Right.
So when we see influencers, micro influencers, niche influencers, it's the same thing. It's still someone representing a company. They're just doing it in a different way. As social media continues to gain power, people will continue to try to use it to connect. But those aren't the tools to use to build a brand. Those are parts of ad campaigns. And
Right.
so those should come after the foundation work has been done and the true brand building has begun. Then you can get into those kinds of influencer or mascot marketing.
No, that makes sense. How important is it? Because a lot of people are very much interested in storytelling, whether that's personal storytelling. I know that I just recently lost a uncle, and one of the great things that happened is that, well, not great in the sense of losing him, but the great thing that has developed out of that is that his granddaughter, my second cousin, and everything, has talked about that she collected some of that storytelling information and is hoping to turn it into something or another at a later time. Now, whether that's internal, meaning it just stays in the family, or whether it becomes a book, only time will tell. But even in the branding space, I know a lot of people are looking at that digital storytelling as part of what they are doing. So, could you just talk to me a little bit about digital storytelling and how that is part of the brand development, and whether this is something that we are seeing as much of as we would like? Because one of the things that I get frustrated by with storytelling is that it seems like it was more popular at one time than now, and a lot of the regular stories have been lost, and I imagine even some of the digital stories are being lost as well. So I just wanted, as a branding tactic, if you could talk a little bit about digital storytelling.
Sure. I mean, I think storytelling is very much alive. I think it's a huge part of brand building and marketing today. I think that when done right, it can be very captivating. And when we talk about cutting through the clutter, the only way that can happen is with good storytelling. So, no, I don't think it's on the decline at all. I definitely think that there are a lot of people who don't do it very well.
Right.
They think that they're just going to talk about themselves the whole time, their company, their product, their services, instead of talking about the target audience. And they're going to have to learn how to do it in a creative, clever, interesting, attention getting way. So that's maybe missing. But no, we are, as a human race, we come from storytellers and campfire stories and cave drawings. And that's never going to change. That's always going to be an integral part of who we are and how we connect.
Yeah, definitely want to get into the healthcare thing, because I know that one of the other things you talk about is healthcare marketing and some of the trends that are going on there. We do know that healthcare is very popular and all of that. But before we get to that, I was actually going to try a little bit of an experiment and see how this works and all of that, just to see about some of your own branding strategies and all along those lines. Because when I think of Louisiana, I think of two places. I think of New Orleans and I think of Shreveport. And I'll tell you why I think about Shreveport in a minute and everything. But when I think of New Orleans, I actually think of their brand as being kind of and I'm a blues fan, being a blues Cajun food, Zydeco music, as well as some of the other blues narratives that have come out of New Orleans. And definitely, I think of the whole party atmosphere, and definitely some of the mystical mix that goes on in New Orleans as well. You know, some of that kind of alternative messaging that goes on, be that some of the, don't want to call it out of the world kind of things, but things that are definitely seen in the occult light and things in that space. That's just kind of what comes to my mind when I think of New Orleans. Part of that might have been being a fan way too much of True Blood in its early days and all of that. And when I think of Shreveport, I actually had a job offer in Shreveport in a newspaper, because I am actually trained in journalism from Marquette and all of that, Marquette University in Milwaukee. But and when I think of that, I think, unfortunately, and I don't know what it is like now, as being very much of a town similar to Pittsburgh, very much of a gritty kind of town that definitely has some of that working class environment and all in that space, but definitely has that kind of gritty image. And in my mind, I remember it being a little bit on the poverty side, at least at that time that I was applying for the job. And I think that was in the late 80s, early 90s. And that's just kind of some of my imagery of those two environments and all in that space. That's just my personal recollections of those places. Shreveport, that was one of the few jobs that I applied for that I was actually glad that when they called me and said you didn't get the job, I was probably jumping for joy, because I was not really feeling like going to that particular environment, just because it was not what was appealing to me at that time. And Shreveport could have changed and all of that. This is where the experiment goes in. So I was going to see, as a branding expert, what would the ways that you would brand those cities to put them either in that light that I just put them in, or to change the light of what those commercials or thoughts of are those particular towns. And I don't think I'm the only one that thinks of those towns in that particular respect and all along those lines. So that's where I was going to have a little bit of fun and see if how you would brand those cities as a native Louisianian.
Well, New Orleans is definitely not Cajun or Zydeco. Blues, yes. Jazz, sure. Great food, party times, all those things are accurate. But you will not find Cajun and Zydeco in New Orleans. Those are unique and special to the Acadiana area. That's where Cajun comes from, is Acadiana. And that's the central part of the state around Lafayette, which is where I'm based and where I grew up. And so we take our pride in our heritage quite seriously, and we're not loaning out our cuisine or our music to New Orleans. They have enough. Shreveport can be a part of Arkansas or Texas as far as we're concerned. Anything north of I-10 is not good food, not good culture, and not really the part of Louisiana that we most enjoy. So they're on their own up there. I think that the best parts of Louisiana are Acadiana and New Orleans. Those are the two highlights for me, and those are the two areas that I think most people know the state for, based on the surveys and the data that our tourism bureau gathers every year. And so I think that's really where it starts. If you ask 100 people, you're going to get 100 answers with 100 different impressions. So when I say you have to know your target audience, I mean, you have to know your target audience. And so if you
Okay.
go get 100 different answers, those are 100 different brands. Those are 100 different opinions. So then you have to decide what you're going to do with that information. Are you going to take that at face value? Are you going to try to gather the common factors and go from there? But what can't happen is for you to assume that your opinion is the opinion.
Right.
For the most part, people tend to believe their own opinions, and they're not the target audience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, is there any commercials or brand marketing that you can sometimes grit your teeth at when you're watching them on television or when you're going to a movie because you're sitting there going like, I can't believe that they are actually still having this message or still having this type of branding at this particular time and all along those lines. So I was just wondering if there are any messages that you are shocked that are still resonating in the 21st century as a brand strategy. And you're sitting there sometimes, whether it's watching them on the movies or the television or even picking up a newspaper, and you grit your teeth that this is still happening in the 21st century.
Well, I don't think people still pick up a newspaper in the 21st century. So there's that. I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing is a move towards individualization and personalization.
Right.
And so when we stop grouping people together in these big, huge buckets and we start to really get to know our target audience better, we can communicate better. So I am no longer surprised by most things that people do. Um, but the things that people still do that are very, very wrong is wasting money, not having a plan, not following a process, and just throwing something against the wall to see what sticks. That's going to always be a disaster waiting to happen, and it's going to always end up being very wasteful.
Speaking of wasteful and everything, and it does come back to branding and everything, I am still, because he's been out of the market for so long. I mean, he's not been playing basketball now for at least a decade, but you still got a lot of people that are still very attached to the Jordan brand, and they still want to pick up a Jordan tennis shoe, or they still want to pick up this shoe or that shoe that is seems like it would have um, lived past its branding life. But I guess some people are so iconic that they will still be out there no matter what happens. I'm sure that at some point, Michael will totally retire. And of course, like all of us, he will expire at some point or another. And then the brand will take on a whole nother life of its own, because there are still people out there that are getting Elvis and Michael Jackson products and all in that space. I was just wondering if you could speak to the iconic brands, because it does seem that as a brand strategist, there are some brands that are so iconic that maybe they're going to live well past the people's lives and all of that. Like I said, there are still people that are collecting Michael Jackson things and things, and Elvis has been gone since the 70s. So definitely, I just wondered if you could speak to some of the iconic nature of some brands.
Sure. I mean, I don't know why you would think people would stop buying Air Jordans just because Michael Jordan retired. Those two things are separate from each other. The people who have bought Air Jordans in the past decade, or even maybe decade and a half, didn't necessarily ever see that person play basketball or baseball.
Right.
They're buying the shoe because they like the shoe. It happened to have emanated from his airness, but it is no longer directly connected to him. And that's what building a good brand does. It allows a product or a service to live on beyond the original intent or original founder. Look at all of the companies that are on the second, third, fifth, eighth generation of owners. Should those
Mhm.
companies have ceased to exist because the founders no longer work there? Absolutely not. When we do a good job building a good business, then that business outlives the original intent.
No, and not only that, but then you get some brands that have people associated with them, and like you said, they've been gone for a long time, but they're still associated with them. I don't even know at what time the Colonel died, but that is still the image that most people have with Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I do know that he's been gone for a number of years and all in that space. And then you've got others that are more cartoon characters, so they can. I don't know that they'll ever die because, like I said, Ronald McDonald is in, who knows who is playing Ronald McDonald now, because Ronald McDonald has been around forever, and that was definitely the McDonald's kind of brand conversation, was that more of a character person versus the Colonel, which was an actual person. But like I said, even you can watch commercials now and they will have the Colonel, and they'll also have, if you look at Wendy's, the Wendy's daughter, which was the name for Wendy's and all of that. So they will mention Dave Thomas, who I believe was the founder of Wendy, as well as his daughter, who is actually how the brand was came up with their name, because I believe it was named after that particular daughter, and I forgot what the story was, but I know there was a story as to the reason he named it after her, and I think it was because of some health stuff that was going on. But I'd have to study and remember what that story was as to how that came about. And if everybody's watching, if they remember, please let me know in the comments, or let me know just in general, because I have forgotten that narrative and everything. But definitely, I do see those kind of brand identities that are out there. And one of the brands that is totally out there now because of what we've been going through is healthcare. So I was going to come back to healthcare. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the marketing trends that you are seeing in that space, because I know one of the trends that I saw was a lot of people started developing their own brands of masks. And definitely, I know that even my own aunt created because she's into knitting and things of that nature. She created her own brand and definitely passed one of them on to me and then other family members. It wasn't like a mass production that she did, but she did create a few for family and friends and all in that space. So definitely, I was just wondering if you could talk about some of the healthcare trends outside of that, because I'm thinking that that's just one, is that people were creating their own mask, and in some cases it was mass production mask. In some cases it was like my aunt, something that was a little bit more narrowly marketed and narrowly branded. But definitely that would be one trend that I would think would be out there in terms of healthcare. But I'm sure there are many others that are out there in that marketing healthcare space.
Well, I think that the creation of PPE, the I feel like there was a big push maybe right in the very beginning when everyone wasn't sure about the availability of PPE.
Right.
But that really should be done in a healthcare certified manufacturing facility.
Right.
And so I think that for the people who kind of stepped up with the Etsy approach to help supplement was great in the very, very, very beginning of the pandemic back in early 2020. But we've moved, far past that. And
Right.
so now it really is about having certified, governmental regulated, inspected materials, true PPEs. I
Right.
think that when we look at healthcare branding as a whole, there's always going to be a focus on good health. I think if you look at some of the companies like, for example, Walgreens, who finally put their money where their mouth is and says, "Hey, we can't sell." I'm sorry, CVS. We can't sell alcohol and tobacco while also saying that we're a healthcare company. There's some contradictions there and some conflicts. And so, I think that people are starting to call out healthcare companies on those double standards and that hypocrisy. So, if you want to be a company based in healthcare, then you need to be helping people be healthier. If you want to sell sickness, and the effects of sickness, that's a different kind of business. And so I think that people are rising up and kind of using their power to call healthcare companies on it and demanding that they actually care for health, not just treat sickness.
Right. No, I can definitely understand that, and I definitely can agree with you on that kind of standpoint and everything. I think that the other thing that happened unfortunately, and I don't know your thoughts around this and everything, is that there was a branding tactic that was used way before I was born, but it was definitely out there in the colonial era and all in that space and everything. And unfortunately, I think that whenever something happens that is calamitous, that a negative aspect of that can be some bad branding and everything. And the people that I'm referring to is those folks that would come into a town, like a colonial town, and there was a lot of snake oil salesmen types and everything. And unfortunately, with this new pandemic, and we are winding down and getting out of it, so, definitely, hopefully as fast as possible. Hopefully by next year. Well, actually, I think it'll be like the flu; it'll always be around to some degree. But in the sense of being a imminent threat, hopefully it'll be totally not an imminent threat by next year, in that sense and everything. But I do know that through this, there have been a new rise in snake oil salesmen and all in that line. So I was just wondering, is that something that, as a branding expert, concerns you? Because I do see that there seems to be in this space this new brand of people that have this, way of curing stuff that may be a cure or may not be a cure. And I'm sure there's some people, not necessarily myself, because I actually see some benefits in crypto, but there might be some people that might even put crypto into that same category as new brands that might not be as legitimate as people would like them to be. But I didn't know if you had any thoughts around that from a branding standpoint.
Well, I think that we have enough access to information now that people should not get tricked by hackers,
Right,
spammers,
right,
or unverified products.
right.
Unfortunately, I think that greed, it will always exist. I think that people will always think there's a quick way to make a buck instead of doing the work that it takes to actually be successful legitimately. And so, anytime that greed meets opportunity, the snake oil salesmen, as you call them, are going to have a chance to separate someone from their money. Um, but these days, you have access to so much information on the internet. Uh, People should not be able to be tricked anymore. Unfortunately, it still happens every day.
Unfortunately, it does happen every day and all along those lines. One of the things that you've done, and I was curious about it because sometimes, and I'm still in that, unfortunately, at 60, in that single space and all in that lines. But when talking to friends of mine that are work together and all of that, sometimes they are saying that that is a great thing for their families. It is a great benefit to work with their other half. I know that my parents actually founded a radio station when I was a teenager, much to about the same age as my nephews now, because I think they started it when I was around 15 or 16. So it might have been a year or two after their current age and all of that. But definitely it was when I was a youngster, and some of it was good in the sense that they worked together. Some of it might have been working too much together and all of that. And that might be the reason that they are no longer together. But definitely enjoy and admire both of my parents for the different things that they have done in their lives and all in that space. Dad as an artist, mom as a foundation, working with. We talked about foundations earlier. She worked with that trust fund, actually, with some of that anti cigarette settlement money, which is what the Golden Leaf Foundation was giving money to people to do a lot of work in. And she was the first president of that. And of course, I'm very proud of their work at the radio station and a number of other things that they did. But I also know that that total working together might have been part of the reason that they're no longer together. And I'm not saying that I know that for a fact, but I just wonder, as one that has worked with your husband and worked with him for a number of years, if you could speak to that work-life balance and how y'all managed to balance it as the co-founder, you being one of the co-founders of Brand Russo.
Sure. Michael and I started the company together back in 2001. At the time, I was pregnant, 8 months pregnant with our second child, and then we went on to have a third and a fourth. So I guess counting the business, that's five total. And it's been a challenge. Our kids will tell you that they spent a number of family dinners having to listen to us talk about clients or logo projects, and they did not particularly enjoy it. Uh, and at the same time, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I think that he's been a great business partner. We are the two sides of branding. All successful brands are built with a combination of strategy and creative. And I'm the strategic thinker, and he's the graphic designer. And so those two things combined have made for the success of our business as well as for our clients. Um, I think that most people in working with their spouse, it's a challenge. You've got to set some ground rules. You've got to figure out how to separate it so that you don't bring work home every day.
Mhm.
It's not easy, but I think it's been worth it for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it's definitely been worth it, and it sounds like y'all have done a great job with it. Could you talk just a little bit about some of the clients that you've had and some of the ones that you have really enjoyed working with? I did mention the case study because I did see that the Saints were one of those case studies, but I did see some other ones as well, including one that had a Texas base and everything that I was looking up about you and everything. But I'd love to hear from your mouth some of the successful brands that you have worked with and what made them successes in your mind.
Well, sure. We didn't do work for the Saints, the team. We did work for First Bank and Trust, who is the official bank of the Saints. So I
Okay.
think that might be what you saw. Our work for all of our clients really always comes down to those same four core principles: knowing who their target audience is, knowing why our client is the right choice instead of the competition, knowing what the message should be to get their attention and connect with them, and then where those messages need to go. When we do that work properly and successfully, then our clients benefit in significantly because it's how you build a brand. It's just the right way to do it. Our client roster really covers the country. At this point, we have clients in 300 different markets across the U.S. We focus on B2B companies. Those are the companies who sell products and services to other businesses.
Mhm.
And so they're the ones that we have done the most work with and done the most success for. And I think that when we do our job right and mostly in picking a good client to work with, that's helpful, then our clients are very successful and everybody wins.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. By the way, I'm glad that you did mention because that's sometimes the way me, well, at least I felt, and I think my brother felt the same way. But you're right that if you are working together and you're working as a business, it does sometimes feel like that business is the other child. So definitely, there were
Sure.
times that I was sitting there going like, okay, who's getting the most attention? Me as one of the two kids that we had, or the other child, which was the radio station, and all along those lines. And there's even sometimes those sibling rivalries that exist, even though it's a non-person entity and all of that. Because one of the stories that I've told even on this network and told in other interviews is that um, I remember many a time mom coming and picking me up from RDU, which is our local airport. And at that time, it was much smaller than it is now. It's an international airport. I don't think it was international at that time. And literally picking me up and asking me, and we're talking like the 80s, early 80s, who are you going to come and visit? What are your plans for what you're going to do now that you're here for Christmas or summer or whatever? And, without the um, popularity of the computer, and definitely cell phones weren't as popular in my mind back then as they are now. So it wasn't like I had called all my friends and everybody and had a game plan. But as you know, as a mom yourself, moms will oftentimes have a game plan for you. So generally about halfway through the trip, mom would give me what I call the mom guilt trip. So she'd be like, well, I was started working at 6 o'clock and I worked until about 4 or 5, and then I had to come and pick you up from the airport, and I'm supposed to work until about 10 or 11. I have got this brilliant idea, this great idea. How about I drop you off at the station? You do the work, and I'll go home and fix the dinner and everything else. And then you just come back when you're done and all of that. So, like I said, I thought that was a typical mom move when there is that third kid and entity and all along those lines.
Sure, sure. I mean, we've had to have balance. We made sure that we were always home by 5, and so we could have family dinner together. That was a priority to us 7 days a week. Our kids participated in lots of activities. Our son is in his last year of playing college baseball. Our daughters all participated in volleyball and dance and cheer and all the things. And so I think they would tell you that they had pretty fulfilling, good childhoods, and that they had very involved parents. Michael was able to work his schedule so that he was Jackson's football and baseball coach all through high
Oh,
school. And so, I think that's a credit to him as a dad and a boss, that he was able to get his work done and still make time for the kids. And we made that a priority. And I think that we knew going into it, our kids were our first priority, and our business was second. And I think when you put your faith and your family first, and then your business, employees, and then clients. I think that everything works out when you have the right priorities.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't realize until I was reading some of your bios and some of your past articles and everything that Louisiana had, as particularly South Louisiana, had such a huge radio market. So I guess y'all definitely have to advertise toward the radio in that market. And I guess with New Orleans being part of that, I shouldn't be overly surprised. But definitely, it does seem like that seems to be something that brands have to recognize is the radio side of branding as well.
Right, right. No, absolutely. We've always liked radio because it's a storytelling medium. And I
Mhm.
think that anytime you can tell stories, you're going to be successful. Obviously, with the decline in listenership these days across the country, it's challenging to still be able to utilize radio the same way. So now it's about finding new ways to use those markets.
Yep, and podcasting and definitely live streaming are some of the ways that more and more people are doing it. What made y'all decide y'all wanted to write this particular book? He said, she said, and I do know that in some of the things you have mentioned that there are several anecdotes in the book that can help those budding entrepreneurs and folks that are thinking about going into business. And of course, I'm sure that we would love to hear at least one or two of those anecdotes even here as well. So I'd love to hear one, what made y'all decide to write the book. And if you've got a couple of those anecdotes that you are willing to share, I do know that Michael probably would have maybe some different ones, but I'd like to hear Jackie's
Probably so.
anecdotes.
Just like in most aspects of a marriage, there's always one person who's better at something than the other. My husband cannot find the dishwasher in our house to save his life, and I don't know where the oven is. So I think that everybody has their strengths that they bring to it. And the book was an excellent opportunity for us to bring both of our strengths to the same place. And so being able to talk about the building of our business, the development of Razor branding, and how we've used that process to help our clients, it was just a great way to do that. We told stories about the work we've done, about the clients we've worked with, about the projects we've worked on. If I tell everybody all the stories, then they don't need to go to Amazon and buy the book. So I think that it's a great story about how businesses can build their brands, and it's a great story about how married people can work together.
No, it definitely sounds like a great story about that. And what advice would you give to folks that are thinking about working together, be they in a single dating relationship or be they as you two are married and all of that. So what advice would you give to folks that are thinking that they want to work with their business partner and that is also their life partner in whatever that relationship may be it marriage or be it that dating space?
I think every partnership, whether you are teammates or co parenting or married or working in a business together, I think that you have to start with clear lines of communication.
Mhm.
Everybody needs to be very honest and direct about what their intentions are, about what their priorities are, and you've got to make sure that you're aligned. When Michael and I first started dating and we talked about having kids, it was important for us to discuss how many kids we wanted to have. And discuss how we were going to raise those kids. And we looked at other people and the choices that they had made in child raising. And we saw some things that we aspired to be, and we saw some things that we wanted to work very hard to avoid. And so, because we were aligned in that, it was a lot easier for us to work towards it. Now, it was still hard. I mean, there's definitely been times when the aspects of lazy parenting have entered. And so we have to remind ourselves that we have to get back to the hard work of it because it's important. It's the most important thing we're ever going to do. And so those priorities kind of come through. But it all starts with communication, really knowing who you are and what you bring to the table, and making sure that you're all working together towards the same goals. That's how you can be successful.
And speaking of communication, and communication is very important and all of that. And I have a dear friend of mine that lives in Ohio, and she will get on me sometimes because I will mispronounce her name. It is pronounced, if I'm remembering correctly, and she listens to this and I do it wrong, she'll probably call me out on it once again, as she has done several times. But I think the correct pronunciation is Kara and all of that, even though it's spelled with a K and all of that. kind of space. So in terms of branding, I do believe in making sure that people are called by their right name. So I've definitely said Miss Russo, and I think I've said Jackie a couple of times, but is that the correct pronunciation? And is that something that as a branding person you get on as well? Because I do know that Kara and some of my other friends that have names that are sometimes not spelled the way that we expect them to be spelled will definitely get on you if you don't pronounce their names correctly. So I do know we've done this interview for almost an hour now. I definitely want to make sure that I am saying the name correctly because I do believe that names matter. As a matter of fact, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine who is a chess master, and I think that in the branding for that particular show, and it's one of the chess shows we do, I called him a chess expert, and he said that he is a chess master and did not like the term chess expert for whatever reasons. So in that case, as I put it after he wrote me back, names and terms do matter. So I like to be making sure that I am doing the things correctly. So I even wrote in and apologized to him since he likes the title chess master, not necessarily chess expert.
So, to answer a couple of your questions, yes, Jackie is correct, and
Okay.
so I appreciate that. I would have probably let it go though if you had pronounced it any different way, because I don't really care. It doesn't bother me. I would rather answer to a different pronunciation than embarrass someone or call them out and correcting them in front of others. I don't really do that. I really have disliked having this unique spelling of my name my whole life because it was so easily mispronounced and people, could never remember how to spell it the same way, etc. But with the advent of social media and the ability to have that spelling as an available username for most online accounts, I'm second guessing my dislike of it for the first 40 years of my life because now it's very helpful that I can have my username as my name just about every time.
Yeah, no, I hear you. One of the other things we talked about earlier, and I want to come back to that just for a second, is a lot of times you use, and you mentioned earlier, influencers. And I do know that I have friends that are in that influencer space, and sometimes they, as influencers, will tell you that they can help with the branding and help with the whole notion of branding whatever you're trying to brand, be it I have a friend that's a funk musician, or whether it's in that space, or whether it's as an artist, or whether it's as a restaurant or business or whatever. And I do find that a lot of influencers will try to sell their branding abilities. So I'm just wondering, do you think that that is convoluting the whole conversation, and that the influencers are actually misrepresenting what they can do in the branding space, or are influencers a form of branding? Because I do hear branding used quite often by the influencers as well.
Well, I think that as long as you remember the definition of branding, which I said at the beginning, it's the emotional connection that people have with a business, product, or service. And so, if someone is positioning themselves as an influencer, we go through all of those steps to verify their ability to influence the target audience. You
Right.
can have 10 followers on social media, you can have 10 million followers on social media. If you don't have an ability to influence my client's target audience, then you're not going to be an influencer for my client. Some people have been very successful in that space, but that's the minority. The majority of people who position themselves as a quote unquote influencer are just trying to make a buck. And
Right.
so, again, it's back to research. Let's go and actually do our due diligence. Let's research who the target audience is. Let's verify that this person has sway with that audience. And, I think that the rate that people charge is all over the place. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's about verifying, again, that the rate is a good match for the amount of influence they actually wield.
That is one of those questions I have even from a branding standpoint, because when I hear that term, and I've even heard people say that locally, I mean, in here in Durham, that I have some semblance of influence, but what that influence is, I don't necessarily know, even though some people may say that I am an influencer in one form or fashion here in this community, be that because of my media connections, or be that because of some of the things that I do in event planning and some of the other stuff that I alluded to very early in this show, and everything in that space. But I do sometimes think that from a branding standpoint, influencer is one of those misused terms that I don't know that everybody that calls themselves an influencer is necessarily an influencer, because this, as you said, an influencer is supposed to be someone that can influence and help make a sale, or help make influence your decisions in one way or the other, whether that's sales or whatever. But sometimes I think that people just like the term influencer and aren't necessarily influencers in actuality. So I just wonder your thoughts around that. Do you think that that is something that is a misused term by many people?
Well, I think it is quite misused. People call themselves influencers, and so my question is, who are you influencing?
Right.
Because it doesn't matter how many followers you have. I want to look at the engagement on those posts. And then an actual next step is and influencing on behalf of the companies that you represent. Have you influenced sales? If you haven't, then you're not an influencer in that way. I have influence over the 4 kids that I gave birth to and have been raising. Does that mean they're going to do what I want them to all the time? Absolutely not. I have influence, but I don't have control. I mean, they're all of college age now.
Right.
And so, I think that people see very, very, very rare, few famous celebrities and think that they are going to aspire to be like that. Well, I don't think they also necessarily understand the work that it takes to get to that place,
Right.
how large that platform is, and how many different pieces of the media puzzle those people have put together to build their array of influence.
No, I agree. One of the other branding tactics that I've seen a lot of people use, be it local or um, national or even international, and I don't know that it is always the most effective use of money, but I was just wondering your thoughts around this, because you kind of alluded to it earlier. But definitely, there are people out there that, if they have a brand, will automatically rush to find their local celebrity. Like here in Durham, they might go try to find, say, a Duke Blue Devil, or find a UNC player, or we actually have a fairly well known, at least here, but I would even argue that it has some influences and some people that know it outside of this area, like in Atlanta and DC. Great historically black college and university called North Carolina Central University. So they may grab like the coach from there or one of those players and try to get them to get involved in whatever their campaign is, whether that's an ad or whether that's a whatever that they are doing, and all of that. I'm sure that some of the Durham Bulls, because we mentioned them earlier, have been approached about representing this brand or that brand as well. So I was just wondering, as a branding expert, do you think, because I do remember in the earlier days that was a very popular strategy to go grab the latest entertainer or the latest athlete and to put them out there as the face of the brand, even though they may not even be that involved in the brand itself or even use the brand. But that was just kind of a good and easy, and some people would say cheap tactic, to get people to buy into the product. So I'm just wondering, are you thinking that we're seeing a lot of these celebrity endorsements, and are they as effective as some people think in the branding space?
I mean, I have no idea. I'd have to look at a lot of data to determine if something has been effective or not.
Yeah.
And so, we have a pretty clear criteria whenever we're going to analyze that. It starts with us knowing who that target audience is,
Mhm.
understanding if this person has any of those people in their social media or email or newsletter readership, and then seeing not just the followers but the engagement and then the potential influence. So I think that every strategy is just as good as any other strategy
Right.
until you look at the real numbers and do work to give it some true fair evaluation.
No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that the two founders talk about on a regular basis, and we've kind of talked about it before, but I just wanted to hear your views. But they are very big on the fact of the education system, and meaning the U.S. education system, but even the world education system, because they get frustrated that we're not teaching enough of basic values that we need in life. Like I know that they both have background in the financial world, either as customers or as even being involved in this case, as a pension attorney and everything. But they definitely get frustrated that common sense things, like knowing how to manage your budget and knowing how to do day-to-day things, even having business plans if you're going to go into business, are not taught as much as they felt they were in the past. I was just wondering, as one in the branding space, are you comfortable with the way that we are teaching about education around business and business development?
Well, I don't think that everybody needs to know business. I don't think everybody needs to know welding. I don't think that everybody needs to know about any topic. You know, I feel like what we need to probably do is a better job of structuring education around people's aptitude and
Hmm.
opportunities.
Right,
Um, that said, sure, a little personal finance class would be a good idea.
right.
But you know, a couple of my kids will never start businesses, so to put them through a class on what an LLC is and how to start one, it would be completely non-applicable for them.
Gotcha.
So you know, I think it's about balance. We, I think you're getting a
Yeah.
lot of background noise there.
Yeah, there's apparently mowing the lawn in the background and all of
Gotcha.
that. So that happens every once in a while when you're doing a live broadcast and all of that.
Sure,
So whenever you're answering questions, I may put myself on mute while they're doing that in the background because that's the one way that we can counter that. And oh, that's the only disadvantage of doing live broadcasting from apartments and things is that they're not always
sure,
on your schedule at all in
of
that space.
course. Well,
One
to
thing.
answer your question though, we have done a lot of work with the University of Louisiana Raging Cajuns and the new NIL space, and so we built out a program for them called Ultra. It stands for University Lucrative Training Resource Advantage, and it has two components. The first is, in fact, education. All of those student athletes are going to go pro in something after college, and so making sure they have the education necessary to be successful professionals, whether it's in business or in entrepreneurship, or in whatever their major is. This gives them access to subject matter experts who come in and teach classes every month to make sure that our student athletes are as prepared for success as possible. The other half is the name, image, and likeness space. And so to date, there have been almost 150 NIL deals from July of last year to now for the student athletes of the University of Louisiana. And so that is obviously a crash course in business for them. And so I think that's been a great thing. So, yeah, I think having personal finance classes at the high school and college level are an awesome thing. But I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to know how to start and run a business. Not everybody's going to do that.
Definitely agree with you on that. I know we're getting ready to wind down because I know you've got other things to do. I could actually sit here and talk and have this conversation with you for hours on end, and I'm actually thoroughly been enjoying this conversation and hope that you've been enjoying it as well. And
Of
hopefully, I can
course.
get you to come back into the near future and to continue the conversation. But I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of very quick questions that I generally ask everybody that hopefully will have some fairly quick answers and all of that because I definitely do want to respect your time and all in that space and everything. But one of the things that we've talked about on this show as well as other shows, and you kind of alluded to it with your conversation around your um, marriage and how the business has played into that. But definitely we've had conversations on this show and others about the imposter syndrome, this belief that you're not as good as you are could set out to be and all of that and that you're kind of self-doubt and I know that I've been guilty of that in my own life where I've not gone after relationships and or businesses because of that self-doubt and that self-criticism that we all have within ourselves. So I'm just wondering in your own life how you have dealt with that inner critic as well as those outer critics. I'm sure there have been people even outside of your family because it sounds like the family is very supportive and particularly your husband but there have probably been other friends and family that have been going like, Jackie and your husband, are you actually going to sit there and start a business? And these businesses aren't always successful, so they're probably going like, Jackie and Michael, do you know what you're getting into? And give you all the reasons to not be successful. And I'm sure, like myself, you've had that internal critic that has definitely sat there and nagged at you and all in that space. I think we've all had them at one time or another. So I'm just wondering how you dealt with the inner and the outer critics.
I think it's about being prepared. I think the more work you do, the more successful you're going to be. And so when we were starting the business and didn't know anything, I read a lot of books and
Mhm.
talked to a lot of people. And the more I could learn, the more successful I could be. And that success led to confidence. I think that most people don't do the work that it takes to be successful. They
Right.
think there's a shortcut or an easy way, and that ends up biting them on the ass later.
No, I definitely agree with you that that definitely happens quite a bit. And the other thing that I think in terms of shortcuts that people do all the time is, and which is the other thing I was going to bring up very quickly, is they don't understand their own worth. Because I do know that quite a few people, whether they be in the arts or be in advertising or in marketing or in PR, don't always assess their own worth and don't always charge according to what they are actually worth. So I was wondering if you could speak to those folks that might be thinking about going into the branding space or even the public relations or some of the other spaces, but are thinking that they are not worth charging, say, $100 or whatever the going rate is for the field. Because I think that sometimes we don't know our worth and we don't charge accordingly because they, particularly in the creative field, because we feel that that you don't have that conversation with your plumbers because the plumber, whatever they're going to charge you, that's what you're going to pay. But we will try to haggle and negotiate with those in the creative fields, even those in the marketing and branding. So I'm just wondering how you deal with that and how you have dealt with that, both you and your husband.
Well, I think that the access to technology has given people a false sense of their own ability to start businesses.
Right.
There's very small to no barrier to entry. It seems like anybody can buy a Mac and now they're a designer because they
Mm-hmm.
have a Canva account. And I think that we've gotten away from the actual skill sets and talent and trade and craftsmanship that are necessary. And so, and I'm just talking about in my industry. So, what ends
Right.
up happening is all of these people decide that they're freelancers or they're one and two person ad agencies, and they take on clients and they don't do a very good job, and the clients get burned, and then the clients think that marketing doesn't work.
Right.
It's a problem. And so I think that we need to get back to a focus on apprenticeship and
Mm-hmm.
internship and actually understanding your business and working in your business before you think you are old enough and wise enough and experienced enough to start your own business.
No, no doubt. Well, the last two questions I was going to ask, like I said, I was going to respect your time, but I do want to get to that. And I apologize if it went longer than you were thinking it was, but I definitely enjoyed the conversation and hope that I asked some questions that you found interesting and all in that space and in that sense. But the last two things that I ask everybody is one, if you can tell where folks can find you in social media and in the online Amazon or wherever else you want people to go be directed to find you and your husband's book, as well as you and your husband's services and everything. And then last but not least, as I alluded to, the network is an international network. So any message of positivity and peace and hope that you can give to our global audience, that is something that I try to give every one of my guests to do, because I'm all about spreading positivity and hope in this world, particularly when we're going through so many things that can be very frustrating, be that the whole pandemic or be that the war over there in Russia. But it's not just in Russia, there are also wars in Africa, and there's disable and other parts of the globe as well. So one of the small things that I try to do is spread a much as possible message of positivity and hope. And hopefully that message of positivity and hope is spread enough that we are able to make some semblance of a change in the world. So that's kind of like one of the personal missions that I put out there with every show that I do. So definitely, if you can give a message of positivity and hope and how folks can find you.
Sure. So find is easy. It's brandrusso.com. If you go to brandrusso.com, you can find everything about the agency, about me, about the book, about the work we do. It's real easy. Brandrusso.com. In terms of positivity and world message, I think that everybody needs to focus on their neighborhood. If we can do the job of getting our neighborhoods to be the best they can do, to caring for our neighbors and taking care of the people around us, the whole world gets a whole lot better.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. I definitely agree that that is something that is very important. And all along those lines, I was actually thinking that that was one of my lanyards. I was going to pull that and show it to you, but it turned out there was a plug of another sort or something in that space. So maybe the next time I have you on, I'll have a couple of my lanyards with me as well, because definitely that's how we started off this show and all of that. And there are some that are laying around here because, like I said, I was just at Centerfest and I was just at a number of other festivals. So I'm sure that there are some in this space somewhere or another, and I'll have to bring them out the next time that you are able to come on or to come on to some of our other shows. But I do hope that you'll make a return trip in the not too distant future, whether it's this show or whether it's one of the other shows that we do here on the network. But I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and look forward to
Likewise.
possibly having more as well. But definitely glad that your PR people got in touch with me and we were able to arrange this, because I know we had to change the schedule one time. But I was definitely glad to be able to have this time with you and look forward to hopefully having some more conversations in the not too distant future.
Likewise. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your time.
No, I appreciate you as well. So we're going to go out with a couple of PSAs, because PSAs are always important. And of course, we've got some very positive messages that we can get out there in the world and all along those lines. As a matter of fact, I think one of them deals with adoption. So I think I'll bring that and a couple of the other PSAs to get us on out of here. But definitely, we're always glad to have the Ad Council and some of their folks helping us out with some of their powerful messages. So on that note, we'll go out with this one and maybe one other one and get on out of here.
This place that I call
Everyone explaining to her that
attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are on the rise.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer. In terms of the hate crimes, I think there is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.